Last week, British Prime Minister David Cameron got a lot of heat after he made the argument that some applications that don't create a backdoor for governments to spy on individuals should be banned. He was specifically talking about applications like WhatsApp or Snapchat, and he wants to basically create some sort of loophole to the encryption process. That way, certain governmental officials can spy on individuals that might be terrorists, because that's what governments do. They spy only on terrorists, right? Well, now fast forward to this current week, and President Obama is not necessarily saying that these apps should be banned, but he is emphasizing the importance of having backdoors in encrypted messages. Here's what he said. Social media and the internet is the primary way in which these terrorist organizations are communicating. That's not different from anybody else, but they're good at it. He also says, and when we have the ability to track that in a way that is legal, conforms with due process, rule of law, and presents oversight, then that's a capability that we have to preserve. So I would agree with that statement, except in a lot of cases, I mean, if you just look at the Snowden leaks and what the NSA is doing with spying in on us indiscriminately, there is no due process, there is no rule of law, and there is no oversight, okay? There's just a bunch of spying on American citizens that aren't doing anything wrong. So there's an issue with that. But if we did have certain things put in place to ensure that innocent people aren't being spied on, and it's only suspected terrorists that are being spied on, then yes, I could see why it's important to have a backdoor to encrypted messages.
See, now I think this is an indication of past performance. It's a good indicator of future results, because in that, that in this case that they've already proved that the U.S. government has already proved they are not able to be trusted with this information. They're not able to be trusted with following along with just the basic rule of law. So why on earth would we expect that this would be any different? And having a backdoor into these specific software that is intended to make it so that you can't be tracked.
Yeah.
You know, I understand the reasons why, but I think that we've got to draw the line somewhere. And this would be one of the places, one of the many places where I would draw a line and say, no thanks.
They're going to get it. They're going
to do it anyway.
They're always going to win. The issue is always the same. The issue is a check and a balance. Which is really what you just said. Like if the check and the balance is real, if you really have to get a court order and it's a real court that sometimes says no, right? Then okay, I got it. Then that's sort of the system that we have come to expect. But you can't have either no check or balance or just a rubber stamp.
Right, and the way that, or the phrasing, I should say, that Obama uses makes it seem as though there are checks and balances, but there aren't.
There haven't been.
There have not been, and, pushing these companies to create, a backdoor to the encryption, there are other ramifications to that, right? So there's this assumption by governmental officials that they're the only ones that are going to have access to these messages. But once you create that backdoor, who's to say that hackers won't have that access?
Yeah, I think it was in the article specifically that Boing Boing's Cory Doctorow argues that there's no backdoor that only lets the good guys go through it.
Yeah.
Right, yeah.
That sounds...
No, this whole story was spectacularly dirty.
Yeah,
it was great. Yeah, tell me more about the backdoor.
But of course we already know that this data is ripe for abuse, for misuse, for even data mining among companies. We already know that there are indications of companies that have taken the contracting work that they have done on surveillance for the U.S. government, and they've actually offered it to to private companies to help track people and to help fight their enemies. I mean, over at bradblog.com, we have a lot of stories about how this actually happened with the Chamber of Commerce that was contracting out to these different agencies. Look up H.B. Gary. It's quite a story about how they actually used surveillance techniques that were paid for by the taxpayers, developed by the taxpayer money, and were turning it on journalists.
And another thing that I'm always really concerned about is whether or not any of the information obtained through monitoring social media is actually used in an effort to combat terrorism. A lot of times it has to do with discrediting someone. I always think back to the story because it's so indicative of what governmental officials want to do with this information. There were 6 Muslim individuals abroad that the government here in the United States identified as extremists, although there was very little proof that they were extremists. And, the government was worried about them radicalizing people abroad. So what they would do is monitor the type of porn that they were watching to use that to discredit them or belittle them and make it seem as though they're not good people, right?
What is the kind of porn that the government would not use against you? No, it was pretty much missionary porn. We can't use that.
Yeah, that's
against
okay.
them. Yeah, but if it were missionary porn, if having sex with missionaries, then all of a sudden use that against them. The government needs to have the power to investigate terrorists. We see what it can do in France. Right now I'm on your side because it does not appear that we have a system where there could really be reasonable restraints on law enforcement to behave recklessly, law enforcement extending all the way up to the U.S. military. But there has to be a way. Like we've done this in the past. We've followed rules for this kind of thing. I imagine that can be done. Maybe I'm being foolish. I know there are plenty of progressives who would say that I am, but there's got to be a way that they can use this, that they can continue to surveil responsibly.
Absolutely.
That doesn't strike me as that difficult. But
I don't think it's that difficult. I just don't think they're going to do it.
Well,
and
then-
that to me is where they're not going to make the efforts to actually hire the people who are going to follow through with these ethical guidelines and with these other restraints and checks and balances that are put on. I just don't think that they're going to. So not that we really have a say. I think it's pretty clear that no matter what we say here, no matter what any specific American citizens, no matter how many of us get up and say, no, you cannot do this, it's going to be done anyway.
Yeah, and that's actually the point that I wanted to give you guys credit for. The fact that it doesn't matter whether or not we protest this or if we're against this. It doesn't matter if there are no safeguards there to protect or to do checks and balances. They're going to get what they want. They're going to do what they want. And it's been happening for years now, starting with the Bush administration.